Thursday, February 9th, 2023. 8:45 p.m. Pembroke Road in Erith was just like any other residential street, quiet and tucked away from the city's noise. A white Mini Countryman rolled down the road, 3 friends inside. Moments later, headlights emerged in the distance. Just a vehicle coming head-on. The silence of the street was about to be replaced with chaos. What happened next left neighbors shaken, a young man dying on the pavement, and 2 others running for their lives. But uncovering the truth wouldn't be simple. What followed was a long, complex investigation, a trail that led deep into London's criminal underworld. This is the story of Kai McGinley's final night, and how a calculated ambush on a quiet London street exposed a deadly plan and brought down 7 men. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Before headlines called him the victim, before his name echoed through courtrooms and news reports, Kai McGinley was simply a 24-year-old man from Southwark, South London. He was a son, a brother, a friend, and for those who knew him best, a vibrant soul with dreams that reached beyond the streets where he grew up. Kai was known in his community as an aspiring rap artist. He wrote music with emotion and purpose, often scribbling lyrics late into the night. Friends and family described Kai as caring, humble, and deeply protective of those he loved. His sister Kelly said he had a way of making people feel seen, even when they felt invisible. "My brother will never be just another statistic," she told the court. "He was our world, and we were his." Though his life was tragically cut short, Kai wasn't a figure on the sidelines of life. He was deeply woven into the social fabric of his area. He had friends and ambition. He had flaws too, as do most young men trying to navigate life in the overlap of ambition and environment. Some reports and prosecutor Brian O'Neill Casey told the court Kai's murder was linked to drug dealing disputes in the same area. Still, nothing in his past could have justified what happened to him that night. That's what makes this case so difficult to swallow for many. Kai wasn't caught in the crossfire. He was the target. His final words, spoken to a friend just seconds before he collapsed, reveal the horror and confusion of someone who never expected to die that night. Their plan was set. What came next was a night Erith would never forget. The men behind the ambush were not faceless shadows, though they tried hard to be. They were 7 individuals bound by proximity, criminal ties, and a shared readiness to carry out violence. All of them were dressed in black that night, their faces hidden behind balaclavas, moving with a chilling synchronicity. But beneath the masks were very different profiles, some barely out of their teenage years, others older and more entrenched in the life they had chosen. At 34, Bradley Reeves stood apart in age from the younger men around him. He lived nearby in Erith, where he was a familiar presence. Reeve was with the armed group, ready to join the attack. Alongside him was 21-year-old Enrico Spahju, his youth belying the decisiveness of his actions. Spahju was one of the men who shouldered a shotgun, prepared to unleash its power at close range. Next to him was 21-year-old Anthony Walder from Bexley, who worked with Spahju as they moved in on the trapped Mini. Another key figure was 25-year-old Kai Osibaju, linked to Riverdale Road in Erith. He was tied directly to the moment that set everything in motion, the deliberate ramming of the Mini. Whether behind the wheel or acting as support inside the Freelander, his role was to ensure the victims had nowhere to run. With him were 3 others, all younger. 19-year-old Jaylis Gangira from Woodfield Close, and another 19-year-old Charlie Braben from Byron Drive joined in after the crash. The last was 22-year-old Connor Brooks from Horser Road, who helped carry out the ambush once the Mini was stopped. 7 men and a plan that looked anything but random. Every move on Pembroke Road suggested a purpose. But why would so many young men come together for something this violent? What message were they trying to send? And what had Kai done to deserve it? The answers lay not just in the night of the attack, but in the days and dealings that came before. Behind the violence on Pembroke Road was not a random act of rage, but a dispute that had been simmering in the shadows of southeast London's drug trade. Prosecutors later confirmed that both Kai McGinley and several of the men who hunted him down were connected to the same world of dealing in the Erith and Bexley areas. It was a volatile market where territory meant profit and grudges were not forgotten. In that context, the decision was made. Retribution for Kai should not be a warning, not a beating, but death. The attack carried all the hallmarks of advanced planning. This was not 7 men suddenly thrown together. They chose 2 vehicles, each with a clear role to play. We will discuss the role of each in a few minutes. Every step showed coordination. Witnesses would later recall the chaos of black-clad figures moving with precision. Even their escape had been considered. After firing the shots, the men didn't scatter into the night. Instead, they regrouped, retreating into familiar ground. Detectives would later learn that they hid in the garage of Bradley Reeve, one of the ringleaders, while a family member was called to pick them up. It was a chillingly ordinary detail in the middle of a calculated murder. At its heart, the attack sent a message. A turf war had been marked with a deliberate show of violence. Kai was not simply to be hurt or warned off. He was to be erased in a way that would echo across the local streets and drug corners. To understand the scale of what unfolded, we need to walk through that night in sequence, every movement, every sound, every shot. The white Mini Countryman driven by Kai McGinley was actually a stolen vehicle wearing false plates. But for the 3 young men inside, it was their means of getting around that night. Beside him was his friend Bill Burton, while Norman Samura rode in the back. To anyone looking from the pavement, it was an ordinary scene. 3 friends heading down a suburban road. Then, from the opposite direction, a silver Land Rover Freelander, lights switched off, was bearing straight toward them. Following closely behind was a grey Peugeot 307, almost shadowing the first car's movements. At first, Kai tried to make sense of it. Was it just a reckless driver, or what? He attempted to move the Mini slightly left, giving space for the Land Rover to pass. But the vehicle did not slow. Instead, it accelerated. In one brutal moment, the Freelander smashed head-on into the Mini at full speed. The Mini spun violently across the road. Metal tore, glass shattered, airbags burst. Inside, the 3 friends were thrown around. Bill later said he felt dazed, almost knocked out. Norman was jolted in the back. The car came to a stop, badly damaged, leaving them trapped in shock. From both the cars, black-clad figures emerged. They moved fast, as though this moment had been rehearsed. At least 4 of them advanced on the Mini. 2 had shotguns in hand, which we discussed earlier. Residents later told police they heard a burst of 4 to 5 deafening blasts, each echoing down the narrow street. The attackers fired at close range into the car. Pellets tore through glass and metal. One blast tore into the driver's side, striking Kai in the back. The shot penetrated his lung and heart, a wound no paramedic could reverse. Another round slammed into the passenger side window, sending shards spraying over Bill, who by now had thrown himself into the footwell, pressed between the glove box and the floor. Inside the car, the violence didn't stop with the shots. In those last moments, Kai was still alive, but fading. Bill remembered hearing him say, "Bill, I'm in trouble." When Bill turned, he saw his friend lifting a hand, blood spilling between his fingers. Seconds later, Kai collapsed, and that was the end. The attackers didn't stay. The Land Rover, wrecked from the crash, was abandoned on the street. The masked men used a second car to flee from the scene, which sped away into the night. Within minutes, Pembroke Road was left in silence again. One neighbor rushed into the road carrying towels. She pressed them against Kai's chest, her hands becoming bloodied as she tried to stem the flow. Others shouted for the police and ambulance. By the time emergency services arrived, Pembroke Road was in chaos. Police taped off the scene. Paramedics fought to keep Kai alive. At 9:31 p.m., they pronounced him dead. Detectives arriving just minutes after paramedics began their desperate attempts to save Kai found a street transformed into a crime scene. The white Mini stood crumpled at an angle, airbags hanging loose, and beside it, the evidence of something far more sinister than a crash. Kai was confirmed dead at the roadside, what we have already covered earlier. Later, post-mortem confirmed the wound was consistent with a close-range shotgun blast. On the road around the Mini, officers recovered spent cartridge fragments, each logged as evidence by the forensic team working under portable lights. Just meters away, the wrecked Land Rover Freelander stood abandoned, its engine crushed from the force of the deliberate ramming. Inside, investigators found traces that tied it back to known associates of the men who had carried out the ambush. This car was the key to unlocking the route of the attackers. Inside the Freelander, more was found than just fingerprints and DNA. Officers recovered items consistent with the violence of the attack, fragments of shotgun cartridges, traces that would later match those used in the shooting, and even bladed weapons including a machete carried as part of the group's arsenal. Every item was bagged, catalogued, and became part of the growing case file. Beyond physical evidence, detectives began speaking to residents who had rushed to their windows or doors. The consistency of their accounts reinforced the picture of a coordinated ambush carried out in seconds. At the same time, officers turned to the digital trail. Mobile phone data and cell tower tracking began to highlight patterns. Numbers associated with some of the suspects were shown to be in the area at the time of the shooting. Later, detectives cross-referencing this with movement before and after the attack proved vital in narrowing down the list of possible names. Piece by piece, the evidence started to close in. But the clearest breakthrough didn't come from fingerprints, cartridges, or even phone records. It came from something harder to outrun: the unblinking eye of CCTV. Working through hours of footage, investigators first plotted the Mini Countryman's journey that night. They were able to track the white car as it moved through the local streets, showing its approach to Pembroke Road before the fatal collision. More importantly, at some points, the same cameras picked up the convoy of the attackers as well, which shows they were properly following them. Their movements were not random. Frame by frame, detectives mapped how the two vehicles coordinated, boxing the Mini into a trap. After the shooting, the lenses told another story. Later sequences traced that Peugeot to a familiar location, the garage belonging to Bradley Reed, which we have already covered. The grainy images showed men disappearing inside, their outlines, clothing and movements matching descriptions from eyewitnesses as well as the CCTVs from the street. When cross-referenced with the CCTV routes, the evidence lined up. Every camera angle, every signal ping, every trace inside the abandoned car. One piece of evidence on its own might have raised questions. Together, they drew a map. The masked figures who had stepped out for the violence were no longer faceless. Piece by piece, their identities began to emerge. For Kai's mother, Lena McGinley, the murder of her 24-year-old son was more than a headline. In court, she described him as, "Kai was my youngest child and only son. My boy Kai was 24 years old when he went out one day and didn't come home." Her words carried the weight of a life interrupted, not by chance, but by deliberate violence. After his death, Lena found a half-written rap in his belongings, verses he had never finished. She spoke about how it broke her to see the lines cut short, as though his voice had been silenced mid-sentence. The loss rippled beyond the McGinley family. Online, friends and community members shared tributes, calling him an angel and a brother in soul. Some recalled his humility, others his energy, and many simply expressed disbelief that someone so young and vibrant had been taken so suddenly. In the days that followed, flowers, candles, and handwritten notes appeared along Pembroke Road, a makeshift shrine to mark the spot where his life had ended. Strangers and loved ones alike stopped to lay bouquets, a quiet gesture of respect and sorrow for a young man who had become a symbol of loss. By early spring, the investigation had sharpened to a point. Met launched a series of raids across southeast London, determined to bring in all 7 men linked to the ambush. The first to fall was Bradley Reed, tracked through the garage footage. DNA inside the Land Rover tied him further to the crime. Police picked him up at his home in Erith. Enrico Sparhue and Anthony Walder, both 21, were traced through DNA and digital evidence. They were arrested in coordinated operations not long after Reeve. Kai Osibodu, 25, was identified through his connection to the Freelander that delivered the ramming blow. He was detained following surveillance in his own neighborhood. For the younger men, Charlie's Selby Gangara, Connor Brooks, and Charlie Braben, it was the web of CCTV and phone data that closed around them. Each was placed at the scene and their movements syncing with the group. Brooks and Selby Gangara were arrested in the months that followed, while Braben was charged later after further evidence confirmed his role. Despite extensive searches, the firearms used that night were never recovered, leaving investigators to rely on ballistic fragments and other supporting evidence. One by one, between March and September 2023, the 7 were taken off the streets. What had begun as a masked ambush in the dark was now unfolding in the open, each man facing the consequences of his role. The case reached the Old Bailey in 2024, where prosecutors presented the evidence gathered over months of investigation that we have already discussed earlier. The jury agreed. One by one, the 7 men were convicted, their roles and levels of involvement reflected in the verdicts. Bradley Reeve, aged 34, was found guilty of murder and grievous bodily harm. He was ordered to serve life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years. Alongside him, Enrico Sparhue, 21, and Anthony Walder, 21, were also convicted of murder. Each was sentenced to life, with a minimum of 29 years before parole could be considered. Kai Osibodu, 25, tied to the Land Rover that rammed the Mini off the road, was also convicted of murder. He was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 30 years. For the younger defendants, the court accepted that their roles were secondary but still vital to the ambush. Connor Brooks, 22, was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Jalis Gangetera, 19, was given 9.5 years for manslaughter, while Charlie Braben, also 19, was sentenced to 9 years. In total, the 7 men received more than 150 years of prison time. What do you think about the case and the sentences handed down? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you want more raw UK crime stories like this, subscribe to UK Crime Documentaries and hit the bell so you don't miss the next case.